Hi, my name is Alice McAlpine-Riddell and I'm a PhD candidate in the anthropology department at UCL. I've been working with the POWER project for a couple of months now, and as an anthropologist, I am using my qualitative research skills like building bibliographies and literature reviews and conducting ethnography and interviews to research self-defense practices in the UK. So part of my research explores gendered safety practices in New York City, in particular on the subway and on the street, and how these experiences and narratives of safety are circulated and re-experienced on social media. And during my fieldwork, I attended a few self-defense workshops, where I noticed there was a lack of a trauma-informed approach. Just a brief content warning for this film, I will be discussing violence against women, LGBTQ+ folks, and other marginalized groups. As an anthropologist, my approach is historically grounded and culturally informed. It also aims to be intersectional and informed by the current context in the UK. To start with the history of self-defense in the UK. From the early 1600s to 1900s, self-defense began as a right, but came to be thought of as something that citizens could learn and build as a skill through training. While used in many different contexts, from the disciplinary to the national and cultural, self-defense relies on some sense of action in the name of survival. To quote cultural scholar Paul Bauman, a reactive, responsive defense of the self. Bauman argues that during this time, quote, the subject of how to defend yourself quickly becomes intertwined with cultural concerns as diverse as bravery, morality, honor, health, fitness, diet, nationalism, patriotism, end quote, aligning self-defense with more traditionally masculine traits. Moving to the late 19th and early 20th century, we see the rise of women's self-defense that arose out of the suffragette movement, the fight for women's right to vote. One suffragette, called Edith Garrood, trained in jiu-jitsu and can be seen here in this image performing a jiu-jitsu demonstration as a means of self-defense against police violence. Standing at only 4'11", Edith was a proficient jiu-jitsu instructor, emphasizing the use of skill to defeat and outwit a larger opponent who would most likely underestimate physically petite women. When speaking with the BBC in 2015, Martin Dixon, chairman of the British Jiu-Jitsu Association, explained that in those days, the police and public wouldn't expect women to respond with such action and effective resistance. As early as 1908, Edith ran a London dojo with her husband, training women and children in feminist self-defense, a practice that came to be known as suffragitsu. Edith also put together a group of trained bodyguards known as the Amazons to protect and defend other suffragettes at rallies and prevent their arrest. To quote French philosopher Elsa Dorlin, in regards to self-defense and the suffragettes, by training bodies that inhabit and occupy the streets, that move from place to place and find their balance, feminist self-defense opened up a new relationship to the world, a different way of being. Dorlin continues, Edith Garrood's vision is of self-defense becoming like second nature. It's not the means by which equality is gained, but rather an ongoing process of embodying equality and putting it into practice. What is important to emphasize here is that the history of feminist self-defense in the UK is deeply political and even revolutionary. During the World Wars, the feminist movements halted, and yet women's self-defense flourished through public campaigns during the war for women to fight back, often through figures similar to Rosie the Riveter, an image of a hardy female worker proudly showing her bicep. Feminist self-defense re-emerged in the 70s in response to rising gender-based violence and shifting cultural norms about female bodily strength, entitlement, and integrity. Jumping ahead to 2003, a report into women's self-defense supported by the European Commission found that women's self-defense integrates physical defense strategies, assertiveness training, feminist research and practice, and women's own experiential knowledge. However, research conducted in the US, Canada, and Kenya in the past 10 years has found that women's self-defense training should be central to any efforts to prevent sexual violence, documenting evidence that it reduces experience of sexual assault. The research advocates for empowerment self-defense, what was previously called feminist self-defense, to produce confidence in women's abilities to effectively resist an assault, decreasing the rate of victimization. In a 2017 paper, Jocelyn Hollander presents an overview of the literature on women's self-defense, which points to research with survivors of sexual assault showing an increased sense of assertiveness and self-efficacy and a decreased sense of distress, self-blame, and anxiety after self-defense training. The paper also stated that empowerment self-defense training is recommended as a clinical intervention for trauma survivors. When researching attitudes towards self-defense and gender-based violence, it is essential to look at the current cultural context in the UK, which is sadly a bleak picture. This summer, we witnessed far-right riots and racist anti-immigration rhetoric, increasing a sense of insecurity and unsafety for people of colour. In part, this is fueled by misogynistic influences on social media. Additionally, the UK has increased violence towards the LGBTQ+ community, in particular towards young trans people. In London, the trust by women in the Met Police is at an all-time low in the years following the murder of Sarah Everard. Meanwhile, knife crime in the capital continues to rise. This current climate has resulted in an increase in self-defense workshops that define themselves as trauma-informed and embodied, and workshops that are created for specific marginalized groups, including for trans women, LGBTQ+ communities, Muslim women and girls, and teenagers at risk of knife crime, amongst others. In terms of recent research, biosocial research conducted by anthropologists Sarah Gibbon and Rosie Mathers at UCL have found that women's mental health and experiences of urban violence in London was divergent across different intersecting positionalities and subjectivities. Different people react differently to the same place or similar situations. Another recent research paper I found interesting raised concerns about the use of language and highly charged terminology in self-defense spaces. For example, in regards to the term empowerment, feminist self-defense teacher Belle Murphy asks, how can a feminist approach be distinguished from neoliberal discourses that responsibilize women for crime prevention while claiming to empower them? In 2016, the European Parliament published a document on the effectiveness of feminist self-defense in the prevention of violence against women, recommending it be promoted more heavily in policy, financing, and research. Their findings emphasize an embodied approach that does not curtail women's freedoms, that self-defense enables women and girls to experience their bodies more confidently, and that it is a provision taken up by survivors. This was the most recent document I could find. However, in 2018, Welsh Women's Aid ran a seminar based on these findings, challenging victim blaming, expanding women's confidence and freedom, and reiterating calls for more work to be done in terms of public policy on self-defense. In 2020, there was a parliamentary debate in the House of Commons on teaching self-defense in schools, with the debate being marked as resolved as the House had considered the motion. Conservative MP James Gray concluded, quote, "I perfectly well understand that the government cannot lay down for schools what they will teach, when, and how. Different schools in different places will teach different things. It is a right that should be a matter for head teachers and chairs of governors to decide." End quote. As the Department of Education sets school curriculum, this isn't strictly true, and sees the onus and responsibility for self-defense training placed back onto individuals and individual schools rather than making any policy interventions. From a legal perspective, I found a paper from 2022 by Rachel McPherson that found in Scotland, men are disproportionately more successful with self-defense as a legal defense at trial than women. This is because self-defense as a legal defense does not adequately reflect women's experiences of violence, especially sexual violence, and instead continues to reflect male experiences of public violence. While this is not self-defense specific, I also thought it worth mentioning the development of the Women's Night Safety Charter Toolkit, which was created under the Mayor of London's Night Czar to tackle violence against women at night in 2018. Organisations sign up to the Charter to commit to, for example, training staff in bystander intervention and designing their spaces to make women feel safer at night. The Charter emphasises the role of social and gender norms in violence against women, stating, quote, "They are deeply held cultural ideas about behaviour and qualities, which can include how we should look, act and behave, whether at home, at work or on a night out. Those who feel entitled to commit violence against women often use the idea that a woman has breached these norms as an excuse for their own actions. In this way, violence against women and girls is deeply related to women's inequality." End quote. I actually think this quote is really helpful, as it emphasises social and gender norms and the role they play in violence against women. However, the Charter does not mention self-defense, which again demonstrates a gap in terms of policy. We live in an inherently digital age. Our actions, attitudes, and perceptions are mediated by the digital and take shape in online spaces. Social media is therefore an excellent place to get a feel for sociocultural trends and norms. Looking for Self-Defense in the UK offered a greater range of martial arts-based academies, and some specifically catering towards women's self-defense, but not many. Searching for women's safety or trauma-informed care produced more results in terms of infographics and artwork like this image. It's interesting to think about how we can use social media to debunk certain myths about self-defense, to acknowledge and build on past struggles and work, and make use of artistic means, as opposed to reenactments, to demonstrate scenarios to decrease the chances of re-traumatization. Often social media is best placed for quick, safety information dissemination, as infographics are reshared around friendship groups online. Conversely, there is the danger for the spread of misinformation. Either way, it's important to consider that this is how a lot of information is circulated. Some final remarks. Self-defense practices and attitudes are culturally grounded and historically informed. The current socio-political climate of the UK arguably places a greater need on trauma-informed self-defense training. There are calls for policy changes to self-defense from teaching to law. The history of women's self-defense in the UK is radical, feminist, and political.